amazing. And you flew it at Mach 3.3.
Yeah, but 3.3 max.
Wow, that's awesome. Was it nice and smooth at 80,000 feet?
Oh yeah.
Hi, I'm Laurence Balter, a flight instructor in beautiful Maui, Hawaii. I want to invite you to an exciting new kind of podcast called In the Left Seat. We'll be interviewing people who are making a difference in our world.
Maintain at or above 7,200, being expecting an IFR clearance approximately 5 miles.
Okay, 7200 8 Hotel Whiskey. All right, aloha everyone from Maui Flight Academy and also In the Left Seat podcast. I'm here with just an honor to fly with Bob Meyer, who is a retired flight test engineer from NASA, and he flew the SR71, the F104, the F18, the F16, the T-38. What else am I missing?
F16 XL, let's see,
XL.
that F18.
Yeah, and you also had an extra 300.
Yep.
Yeah. We're about to go IFR here, so we're going to continue this. We're going to go see the volcano. We'll continue this at lunch, but I'm excited to talk to him today, and I'm sure you will be too.
That is literally looking into the mouth of the volcano.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
That is a deep hole.
Wow.
I mean, that is really deep. Yeah. I never really saw the bottom of it. I would have had gone over knife edge, I think.
Okay, so we're teasing the audience, and our first clip was your hair's on fire at 3.3 Mach, and so now we're back on the ground here. So I'm with Bob Meyer, and we're flying around the Hawaiian Islands today, and first time flying a Cirrus aircraft, but we got to talking. You're a competitive aerobatic pilot, and you've flown so many amazing, interesting aircraft, which I want to get to for this podcast. But tell me a little bit, how did your career, where did it start, when did it start, and what brought you to Mach 3.3?
Well, I would say it started when I was actually a pre-teenager. My dad got me interested in radio control airplanes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so we built models, and I flew a lot of models.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided that I wanted to go off to engineering school and become an aeronautical engineer.
Mm-hmm. Where at?
So I went to Purdue,
Uh-huh.
and I graduated there in '75.
Mm-hmm.
But I was part of a program called a co-op program, or an intern program, and so I had my work assignment was in California at Edwards Air Force Base with NASA.
Okay.
And you work a semester, go to school a semester, back and forth like that. It takes 5 years to get your degree instead of 4.
Uh-huh.
So I graduated in '75
Mm-hmm.
with a bachelor's in engineering, aeronautical engineering, and of course my work assignment had been at NASA.
Wow.
And after I graduated, I was offered a job at NASA.
Oh, nice.
And so that's how my career started with NASA.
Now, did you get your flight training prior, or how did you?
Well, I got my pilot's license actually when I was still in school. I worked got my privates,
Mm-hmm.
and then the flight training that I got for the flight test engineering flying that I did, NASA provided me with all that. So.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, and were you stationed at Edwards for a while, or?
Yes.
How long of
my career, most of my career was at Edwards.
Wow.
But they had an exchange program with engineers that worked in the wind tunnel and engineers that did flight tests. And so I volunteered for that.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, a lot of the flight work that we were doing was validating wind tunnel tests.
Oh, wow.
And one of the validations that we did was on winglets.
Mm.
And the winglets were that concept was developed by a engineer at NASA Langley on the East Coast by the name of Richard Whitcomb. And so I went back to NASA Langley and did wind tunnel testing of winglets, and then eventually came back out to Edwards where we did flight tests.
Interesting.
Of the winglets.
Wow.
So that was kind of the very beginning of the winglet concept that you see on a lot of the airliners.
All right. So this is now really at the trailing edge of the Apollo program.
Yes.
And so and the cutting edge of the space shuttle program.
Yes.
And so, were you involved in that portion of the program?
Yes. So when I came back out to Edwards after 2 years at NASA Langley in the wind tunnels, they and as I had mentioned to you, the Johnson people, the shuttle people, came out to Edwards, out to our center, and said, "Gosh, when we were relocating the shuttle after it had been built in Palmdale down to the Cape,
Right.
this before it had ever flown, it was carried on top of the 747. They noticed that some of the tiles had worked loose just flying at low speed on top of the 747.
Right.
And they
Which
said,
is crazy.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
And they said, we're kind of concerned that they may not survive an entry.
Right.
Is there anything you guys could do to test these? And so we ended up picking locations on 2 different aircraft, F-15 and F-104, and we tested the areas of the shuttle tiles that they were concerned about.
I see.
And in fact, we found that some of those were not sufficient to withstand the air loads, and they were redesigned, and then we tested the redesign.
So what would you do then? I mean, take us through a memorable mission on, and just for the audience right now, we are at the Coconut Grill in Hilo. This was not a planned podcast, so sorry for any of the audio background. But take us through a memorable testing flight that you know, in the F-15 as an example.
Well, geez, the F-15 flights were so long ago that I'm trying to think if I have a memorable one. Probably the more memorable ones for me were when we were flying, later on in my career when I had the opportunity to fly as a test engineer on the SR.
Oh, okay.
And of course, those were very interesting flights.
Right.
And one of the memorable ones is you had mentioned that you were just at Oshkosh this summer. And one of our memorable flights was we did a flyby at Oshkosh. And I believe it was 93 or 94. And we went up and did the flyby, and we had a tanker, a refueling tanker from Edwards waiting for us as soon as we did the flyby so we could refuel for the flight home.
Right.
So we refueled, and the boomer was somebody we were familiar with because we'd worked with him a lot at Edwards. And he goes, "Sir, you seem to be leaking some fuel out of one of the nacelles on the engine." And I was talking to him on the radio, and I said, "Well, we normally have some fuel leaking out of the SR." And he goes, "Yes, sir, but this is more than normal." And since he was familiar with refueling, we go, "Okay, that's not good."
Now, were you able to look back and see it, or?
Well, I did have a periscope, and I was able to lift the periscope up, take a look, and I could see something trailing off the back of the airplane.
Okay.
So we declared an emergency.
Okay.
And dumped all the fuel that we just spent time getting on board.
Okay.
And we did an emergency landing in Milwaukee.
Oh.
And it turned out that a fairly big fuel line that ran the nozzles on the afterburner had broken. Okay. And they actually had to do an engine change in Milwaukee.
Oh my gosh!
Wow.
Wow.
So that was definitely one of my more memorable flights.
I bet. So now, I mean, it's such a fascinating airplane, and I want to get a topic later that we can brush on. And I was doing a little bit of reading in about that era and the evolution of the SR71. And one of the interesting things to me was how that was, of course, the Skunk Works, and everybody knew was top secret for many, many years. And that I think it's like 90% of the titanium came from the Soviet Union through CIA, shell companies, and all that. Just so many interesting stories. But what was it like flying that airplane?
Well, of course, it was quite a thrill. You have the opportunity to fly in the first place.
Right.
Now, and we wore pressure suits because we flew so high in the airplane.
Now, were the shuttle suits designed from the pressure suits of the SR?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well, I don't know entirely the history of the shuttle suits, but they were their history, of course, went back to a U-2 and SR71 pilots flying, and they were, as I recall, the shuttle suits were modified a little bit for some comfort for use in the shuttle, but yeah, they definitely had a lineage back to the SR and to the U-2.
Now, you mentioned something during flight. that the test data that you did back in the 90s is being used today aerodynamically for future design. Tell us a little bit about
So NASA had a program, well, actually a country had a program called High-Speed Civil Transport in that time period. And ultimately that went by the wayside, got canceled. But everybody had in their vision that, we could eventually someday have a supersonic transport to transport people around, particularly to Europe and to Asia for these really long flights. And one of the challenges was the sonic boom that's being laid down by an aircraft that's going supersonic.
Right.
So some of the work that we did is we had a microphone array set up in a remote area near Edwards Air Force Base, and we would fly over that at various speeds, and there were fluid mechanics codes or computer codes that were used to predict what that boom would sound like when it got to the ground. And so we spent a fair bit of time doing some research with how could the sonic boom from a supersonic aircraft be mitigated and reduced to the point where overland supersonic flight would be permissible. A lot of people don't know the Concorde did not go supersonic over land, just over the ocean.
Right. So that was my next question, which is, at what point in the SR did you go supersonic? I mean, at a certain altitude to lessen the boom? Or?
Yeah. We had a standard climb profile, and the SR, since it was considered a military airplane, didn't have to operate to necessarily the same rules as a civilian aircraft. We tried to be above 30,000 feet when we were supersonic.
Right. Now, as many followers on my YouTube know, and AOPA, I'm a huge proponent of flying angle of attack. Was an angle of attack indicator used in the SR? How important was it with?
My recollection is we just flew everything by indicated airspeed, because that airplane predated angle of attack a bit, and, an angle of attack indicator. Okay. Of course, some of the later airplanes not that. But.
Right. So, what is life like at Mach 3.3?
Well, of course, you're doing. You can roughly take whatever your Mach number is, and then that's about what you're doing in terms of. Let's see if I remember the gallons right. So if you're doing Mach 3, you're doing about 3,000 miles an hour.
Right.
And you see, you would think at 3,000 miles an hour things really look fast.
Right.
But you judge how fast you're going by the angular rate at which you see things go by with your eyes.
Interesting.
So when you're up high, you're up to 70,000, 80,000 feet when you're doing that speed.
Right.
The angular rate of things on the ground aren't that fast.
Right.
So when you really know that you're going fast is when you have a checkpoint that's, say, several hundred miles apart, and you make it there in 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh, God.
And you go, okay, yeah, we're going fast.
What is the skin temperature of the aircraft at that speed?
It gets pretty warm. Let's see if I can remember. You're making me pull out old brain cells here. The area around the engines got quite hot, up to several hundred degrees. As I recall, around 1,000. The skin in areas not around the engines did get up to several hundred degrees, and actually the tale is that after you've flown hot, you actually annealed and kind of reheat treated the skin, if you will, from the heat.
Could you actually in the cockpit feel or see the actual movement?
You couldn't.
No,
you couldn't. Now, one thing I did do is I put my gloved hand up on the window and felt it, and it felt warm. I mean, it felt like the window on an oven.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's amazing. And so when you would prepare for an approach and slow down, I mean, how many hundreds of miles would you be? To come from 80,000 feet to get down to the ground, what's your descent planning?
So we had to start descent a couple hundred miles out, and you come down slowly, of course, and then try to be subsonic. You'd be subsonic before you came below 30,000 feet.
Okay.
And then once you got subsonic,
Right.
then it was just kind of like any other airline
Okay.
in terms of.
That was my next question. I mean, did it fly like pretty much any other airplane at subsonic? And yeah, so that's neat.
Yeah.
Wow. So when you're at 80,000 feet, which I think the Kármán line is what, 100,000 or so?
Yeah, it's something like that.
So were you able to, at certain times of the day or night, I mean, did you do any night flying?
We did.
Yeah.
We did a few flights at night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was it? I mean, could you see like an astronaut's viewpoint at that point, or?
Not really. You know, we were right at the fringe of where you could actually, just below the fringe where you could actually see the curvature of the Earth.
Uh-huh.
Of course, you know, you had quite a view from 80,000, but
Right.
and some people thought they could see the curvature of the Earth,
Uh-huh.
but I would never convince myself that I could.
Okay. Wow. And so, how many years were you with NASA then?
Well, let's see. I retired after 29 years.
Oh, wow.
So almost 30
Okay.
years.
Okay. All right. Beautiful. All right. We're being served lunch right now at a traditional Hawaiian fare here. So we're going to have our ahi, and we'll be back after this.
Yeah. So another interesting side story with the shuttle tiles is after we had finished the airload program and they actually did redesign some areas to beef them up. Again, on the flight down to the Cape from Palmdale, where the shuttle was built, they were taken down to 747. They got on the edge of a thunderstorm and they went through a little bit of rain.
Mm-hmm.
And when the rain hit the tiles, it damaged them.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so then the JSC people, the shuttle people, were back again, and they said, we had some damage to the tiles from rain. Could you guys do a rain erosion program?
Mm-hmm.
And they had in mind, the Air Force had a tanker. It was a refueling tanker that they modified with a ring on the back that could spray water out to simulate rain.
Mm.
And they'd been using it to certify windscreens on various fighters and so forth.
Okay.
So we said, okay, great. So we put a probe on our carrier aircraft for the tiles called a Nolenberg probe, and it was two probes that had a laser light, coherent light that shone between there, and it could, with a high rate detector, and it could actually measure the size of raindrops.
Wow.
That you're flying through.
Okay.
So the idea is we would know the size of the raindrop and the speed that we went through the rain.
Okay.
And we could then correlate that to an entry for the shuttle. So we went behind the spray tanker for the Air Force, and we nothing was happening. No tiles were breaking, and so we had them. I think we'd gone up to over half of their capacity, the capacity they could spray water out at.
Okay.
And one day we were scheduled to fly behind the tanker, but it was bad weather in the desert of all things.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to cancel the tanker, but we said, well, we'll just go out and fly through some rain.
Right. So this is in which airplane?
This one on 104. And we had a fixture that we could mount underneath the 104, and we had these tiles mounted on there. And so we flew through some rain shafts, and almost instantly the tiles exploded. When the water hit, they just took pock marks out of the tile. And we're like, well, that's interesting. We couldn't get anything to happen behind this tanker for the Air Force, but as soon as we got real rain, the tiles failed. So then we went and did one more flight with the Air Force tanker, and they turned it up full blast.
Okay.
Put out as much water as they could with simulating a heavy rain. Nothing happened. So we came to find out that what was happening with the Air Force tanker is when the water came out of there, the air basically turned it into a mist, and it really wasn't representative of rain. So the Air Force, shortly after that, quit using that to certify windscreens.
Sure. So it seems to me that, of course, hindsight is 20/20, right? But the biggest weak point in the shuttle program were the tiles. And how vulnerable they were to damage?
Well, I don't know that it was the biggest weak
Okay.
point in the
Okay.
shuttle, but it was certainly an area
One of
that you
them.
had to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there were weather limitations and so forth set for landing back at the Cape in the
I
summer and so forth
I see.
with their rain.
I see.
And as far as I know, they never really had any, after we got the test data and said, well, this is what you have to abide by. I don't know that they had any problems
Right. Right.
with tiles and rain or
Right.
air loads.
Right.
I think it was all okay.
Yeah. Interesting. I remember holding one of them heated up when I went to space camp as a teenager, and it was really cool. It's amazing. I mean, just the whole science behind it. So, okay, so having flown the F-104, the SR71, the F-15, the F-18, the F-16, so you have this incredible range of experience in all these different aircraft. The natural question that every pilot was going to want to know is, which one did you enjoy flying and why? And which one was a pig to fly compared to the others?
Yeah. Well, they were all fun.
Yeah, sure.
But I think probably the most memorable airplane for me was the SR.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and of course, we did have one of the airplanes we had was the trainer,
Mhm.
and most of my time was spent in the back seat. As,
The trainer, the SR71 trainer?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I did get a little bit of stick time because we had a stick,
Mhm.
in the back seat.
Mhm.
And but I think the SR was
Mhm.
by far the most fun to go fly.
Mm-hmm.
What about the dog?
Now, you,
The
Oh, that you didn't like as much.
I liked them all.
so when did you become a competitive aerobatic pilot?
Well, that's kind of an interesting story. When I was in school at Purdue, I was a dorm counselor my senior year, and one of the residents on my floor was a gentleman by the name of Kermit Weeks. And you may or may not have heard of Kermit, but Kermit has a lot of warbirds, something called the Fantasy of Flight down in
Right,
Florida.
right, okay.
And Kermit was very interested in aerobatics.
Okay.
So I tell people he afflicted me.
Well, and so you would go fly competitively at air shows, and this was the extra 300, or which?
So competition is not done at air shows. Typically, it's done at an airport, remote airports where there's not a lot of traffic.
Okay.
And actually, Florence and I have just been talking about this with the Olympics. It's very similar to Olympics, only in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a series of judges that watch your flight, and they know on a card what you're going to do ahead of time. And they give you a 0 to 10 on each figure that you fly, and then each figure has a difficulty. And then whoever ends up with the most points wins.
Do you think competitive aerobatics should be an Olympic sport?
I don't know about that since it's a motorized.
Yeah. I always thought it would be interesting.
Yeah.
So now, Florence, you're a local Hawaii girl, and but you also have an interesting and distinguished career at NASA. How did that start?
Well, like Bob, I started when I was going to school. My dad was in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
His last station was Edwards Air Force Base.
Mm.
So my older sister and I graduated from Desert High School at Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
And so Southern California, pretty much was our home, even though my dad is originally from the Big Island of Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
He was
Which we're on right now.
Which we're on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom is from Tokyo, Japan.
Oh, wow.
She's Japanese.
Uh-huh.
So, similar to Bob, I worked while I was going to school.
Right.
And started when I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to the California State Polytechnic University in Pomona,
Mm-hmm.
and was working in the summertime at NASA. So I would go to school 9 months, and I would work at NASA for 3 months. That's actually how Bob and I connected initially.
Mm-hmm.
And like Bob, once I graduated from high school, I was made an offer to work permanently at NASA, and I obviously grabbed that opportunity.
Right.
Unlike Bob, I'm not an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
My degrees are in business and public administration.
Mm-hmm.
But I decided to make NASA my career, since I just believe so much in the mission of the agency. although I did spend, I would say, 4 years with the Air Force in the middle of my career with NASA, and I eventually came back to NASA. Started out in the human resources area, and then that broadened into the general administrative area, and went into different jobs, and then ultimately my last job with NASA was at Stennis Space Center in South Mississippi, and I was the director for center operations, which essentially was like a city manager position. We ran, even though our NASA mission was to test propulsion systems on our big test facilities, we also ran a small city which housed about well over 20 what we call tenant organizations, ranging from military, Navy to academia, and all of that. So we ran the entire infrastructure for the entire population of Stennis Space Center.
So I want to ask a controversial question. Having flown the SR71, this kind of brought something that's somewhat timely. There have been these what is it? Unidentified, not the UFOs, but they call them UAPs or something like that, and reports from very credible sources. And what I find interesting with these particular reports is that they're all in military zones. And we're not seeing these things in New York City or anywhere else. With the SR-71 was so ahead of its time for so many years. One of the things I forgot to point out, but I'll point out on the way when we fly again, and I'll point this out on the video as well. During COVID, here in Hawaii, there were a lot of people pointing out what were considered UFOs and lights in the sky at night, this, that, and the other. And it was in the papers and all this sort of stuff. And I also simultaneously started noticing on our multifunction display, which I'll put in this video, we have a lightning detector, and that lightning detector picks up the electromagnetic frequency that lightning emits at. And sure enough, I mean,
I noticed it came on today.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's there every day, and they're different sizes, different groups, and so forth, and they're all over, but they're all located in the MOAs, in the military operation areas, way out to sea, maybe about 100 miles or so. Based on, and this is absolute conjecture, and if you don't feel comfortable conjecturing, that's fine too, but my thought process is, as much as I would love little green men to visit Earth and make world peace, would you think that we have technology in these skunk work, black ops type of divisions today in our research that could do these magnificent things that these perhaps drones, whatever you want to call them, these objects are? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I haven't personally observed any phenomena like this, so it's hard for me to comment on that.
Right.
You know, I think that when you think of the universe, how big it is, and you think we're the only life forms in the universe.
That's pretty arrogant, right?
It's fairly arrogant, yeah. And I would say, in my mind, if those are life forms that figured out how to travel here, which involves a lot of physics and technology, then they are probably clever enough that we wouldn't see them unless they wanted to be seen.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. Well, yeah, I mean, I know we're walking into a dead-end conversation on this, but I just find it interesting because, I mean, the SR-71, nobody would have dreamed about it and even believed you in the late 60s, early 70s that we were operating an aircraft of this magnitude. So it makes me wonder what is out there today that we have, and that's 50-year-old technology. And what was the ultimate reason why they shelved it? Is there any operating SR-71 in the system at all? So when did you shelve yours?
You know, most people have notoriety as doing the first flight in an airplane. Well, Roger Smith and I did the last flight in
Oh, wow.
SR.
Very cool.
And that was in, I have that written down on my,
Oh, no, that had
on
to
my
have been
wall.
in 2000, was it,
It was in the 90s. I would have to.
Okay.
I'd have to
Okay.
go look at my.
And why did NASA shelve it? Just because the rest of the program was being shelved and no parts, or what?
No, the Air Force actually shut the program down,
Okay.
and we got the assets at that time, which included a simulator and 3 airplanes.
Okay.
What was called the B model, which was the trainer, and 2 A models.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then the idea was we were called a flight research center.
Right.
So we would do flight research.
Right.
And to me, flight research is a little different than tests in that we're typically doing research work to look at the next generation, help develop the next generation of aircraft.
Right.
Although a lot of times it does involve flight testing.
Right. Right.
So we did the sonic boom research that we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, there was a rocket concept called the Aerospike. And it used
pulse
vectoring basically on with rocket chambers.
Uh-huh.
And so we had built a 10% scale wing that incorporated their Aerospike and mounted that on top of the SR.
Wow.
It looks like an extra fin in the middle.
Wow. That's cool.
We were going to actually test that rocket concept at speed because it had advantages once you got supersonic.
Right.
With it.
And it doesn't really get efficient until after like Mach 3 or something, right?
Yeah. And it turns out that is there a picture of it in there?
1999.
Oh, 99. Okay.
There you go. October 2nd.
Well, that was the Air Force. October 9th.
Oh, okay,
of the same
that's
year.
right. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah. And I think that was.
So Florence is looking up the last flight of the SR-71.
Yeah.
Yes. Done by NASA.
But you were saying so at that.
But that was in support of the X-33 program, and that funding for that was going by the wayside, and then ultimately got canceled, and so we lost the funding for that. We never actually got the.
Right.
We did some early flights, but we never actually fired the rocket.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
Flight,
okay. Wow, amazing. Wow. All right. Well, we will continue more of the conversation in flight. We're going to now take Florence and Bob here to the Big Island Candies. We're going to get local chocolate and Kona coffee.
Yay! I love sweets.
So we'll see you in the air after that.
Rarely do I get the cue right as you dip the wing.
Wow, that was perfect.
And we'll hook left.
That was perfect timing. You're an artist, Laurence.
I'm just having a blast flying with Bob.
Oh my gosh.
Bob's having a blast flying with Lawrence.
Yeah.